I can get started. All right. I'll say again, once again, welcome to the Murray Amateur Radio Club. Tonight we'll be talking about the 1 1/4 meter band. My slide deck is titled "What's the Skinny on the 1 1/4 meter band?" Now, some of you younger people might not have any idea what I mean by "What's the Skinny," but you older guys should know what "What's the Skinny" means. It basically means what's the information about the 1 1/4 meter band. Tell me all about it, right? So we're going to dive right in if my clicky thing works. All right. So what's the 1 1/4 meter band? So when I say we're all, now you new guys are probably not all, right? So, but we're relatively familiar with the classic VHF band. There's the 2 meter band. It runs from 144 megahertz up to 148 megahertz, and it's got good long distance propagation, relatively line of sight, right? There's commonly available equipment. Pretty much any amateur radio device you buy with VHF support is going to work on 2 meters. Okay. And it is recognized as a ham band in all of the ITU regions. And I'll just jump in and say what the ITU regions are. So the ITU is the International Telecommunications Union, and this is an international body that has divided the world into 3 regions. Now, the United States, Canada, North and South America, basically, and a lot of the island nations around us are part of ITU Region 2. ITU Region 1 encompasses Europe and Africa, and ITU Region 3 encompasses the Asian area, Australia, and New Zealand, that part of the globe. So it kind of surrounds the planet, and so each area that you might be in is part of a specific ITU region. And the ITU gets together and decides things that are going to be commonly used in radio, not just amateur radio, but all kinds of radio, all kinds of RF related stuff. And they do that because different countries manufacture equipment. The equipment is used in different places all around the world, and they want to try to be consistent and compatible all the way around the world. So the ITU is like this agreement, treaty, you could call it, that manages and controls all of this. The US is ITU Region 2, and the 2 meter band is available in all 3 of the ITU regions. Okay. If you have questions, please go ahead and ask as we move through this. So if I skip over something or I go too fast and you don't know what I'm talking about and you want more information about it, stop me, ask me, and we'll go on into that a little more depth. We also have the UHF band, 70 centimeters, and that runs from 420 megahertz to 450 megahertz in the United States. Some other countries have different allocations for that. There are some rules and restrictions on that depending on where you are geographically. For example, if you are within some number of miles of the Canadian border, you can't use a certain portion of that band because it's in use for something else in Canada, and that usage can leak over the border. Obviously, radio waves don't care about borders, right? So that's something to consider with the 70 centimeter band. You don't necessarily get all 420 to 450. Most of the places in the United States, that's the allocation that you're going to be able to work with. It has good building penetration capability, which means basically if I'm inside a skyscraper or something like that, or a building made out of concrete steel, uh, the 70 centimeter band can punch right through that without a lot of trouble. But it is line of sight, just like the 2 meter. So if I can't see the thing that I'm trying to talk to, I'm probably going to have trouble talking to it. Okay. It's also very commonly available, and it is recognized as a ham band in all of the ITU regions. Again, some countries have different allocations for that, but this part of the band is available worldwide. Okay, there's 2 additional VHF bands that we often overlook. So remember, we talked about the 2 meter band. There's also the 6 meter band, which they sometimes call this the magic band. It has some characteristics that are similar to HF operations. So it can actually do ionospheric bounce and get a lot farther range than the 2 meter band can, for example. Um, there are some other cool things about it, but that's not our topic for tonight. We can talk about the 6 meter band another time. One drawback to the 6 meter band is a half wave antenna is 3 meters long. So, if you don't want to be packing around a 9 foot long antenna everywhere you go. So that's something to keep in mind. And it is not fully adopted across all ITU regions. It's not available for amateur use in all three ITU regions. It's country specific. And so you have to know who you're talking to and if they're allowed to even talk to you. 6 meter, I've seen it used a lot for space operations, like satellite operations, as a downlink band. So even countries where you're not allowed to transmit on 6 meter, you can still receive on 6 meter. So you may have an uplink on UHF and a downlink on 6 meters. So that's a typical utilization of that. And there's also the 1.25 meter band, which some people will call the 220 band, some people will call it the 222 band. We'll get into the details on that in a minute. But it kind of has a blend of the 2 meter and 70 centimeter properties or characteristics. It has pretty good range. It also has pretty good penetration ability for structures. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. And so you're thinking, well, why is it so rare? Why don't more people use it? Well, there's a few reasons for that, and we'll get into those as we move through the presentation. It's only available in ITU Region 2, which remember is the Americas and some of the surrounding islands, and the country of Somalia in ITU Region 1. Why Somalia decided to support it, I have no idea, but they actually allow amateurs to use the 1.25 meter band in Somalia, even though it's in ITU Region 1. So yeah, nobody in ITU Region 3 allows it. So that's one of the factors that's operated against it over the years. There's not a lot of equipment out there that supports this band, but that does seem to be improving as time goes on. So we're going to talk about equipment in a minute. All right, first let's talk about the history of the 1.25 meter band. So this band was initially used as early as the 1930s, with reliable contacts happening as early as 1934. I think the first utilization of it might have been in 1933, and people were actually able to use it effectively in 1934. Now, this was predating the FCC, okay? So the RF bands were kind of a wild, wild west situation back in those days. And amateurs basically did what they wanted to and whatever they could get away with. And as long as it didn't interfere with other services, it was no big deal. The only other services out there at that time really were shortwave and AM radio. So, even this even predates FM radio. So the FCC granted amateur use of the band in 1938. Now, back in this time frame, the amateurs had access from the FCC to the 2.5 meter band. The 2 meter band did not exist. Well, obviously it existed, but it was not used. And the 1.25 meter was a nice harmonic of this 2.5 meter band. And so a lot of the equipment that worked on the 2.5 meter band could be adapted to work on the 1.25 meter band. So everybody loved it. It was great. People used it effectively. Um, then we had this thing called World War II that happened. And during World War II, if you were here or saw our History of Amateur Radio course, you will know that during World War II, all RF communications was restricted to military use only, with specific exceptions, for example, for radio broadcast stations. Basically, they wanted control over it, and it all ended up under control of the Navy. And after World War II, the Navy wanted to keep control, and the FCC had to wrest control back away from them to be able to open up other services and things like that. And that's when amateur radio started working again, was after World War II. And the FCC granted the 220 through 225 megahertz for amateur radio use, and that's the 1.25 meter band that we know and love. Now, during World War II, the 2.5 meter band was allocated to aircraft use. And so, we used a lot of airplanes in World War II. And so the aviation community really expanded dramatically over that time period. And so that 2.5 meter band was allocated to aircraft. And so the amateur allocation was moved to the 2-meter band, which is not a good harmonic for the 1.25 meter band, but it is a good harmonic for the 70 centimeter band. So when this happened, the 2-meter and 70 centimeter bands became very popular because, again, they were harmonics and you could very easily have one antenna that supported both bands. And a lot of the equipment was mostly compatible with the addition of certain filters and things. You could support multiple bands in your hardware. Popularity of the 1.25 meter band wasn't so great because none of the manufacturers were building radios for that band. They were all building them for the 2-meter and 70 centimeter band. This was not good for the utilization of the 1.25 meter band. In 1987, there was a desire, a push to get more users, more amateur radio users on the 1.25 meter band, and novice class licensees were given access to the 1.25 meter band for phone. And if you guys are familiar with the term, when we say phone in amateur radio, we mean voice. Okay. So when you're talking on the microphone, that's phone. Okay. As opposed to data or CW, which would be Morse code. Okay. So just keep that in mind. When we say phone, we mean voice. And so novice class licensees, now just to run through the license classes real quick. Back in those days, you had several different amateur license classifications. You had novice, which had CW permissions on several bands, didn't have a lot of phone privileges on any bands. You had technician, which had phone access on a lot of the VHF and higher bands, not much access on HF, a little bit of more CW access on HF. And then you had the general class, which had HF access. You had advanced, and you had amateur extra. Okay. We've done away with giving out new licenses for advanced, and we've done away with giving out new licenses for novice. But if you still have a novice license and you've been renewing it every 10 years, you can still operate with novice privileges. Same thing with advanced. If you still have an advanced license, you can still operate with advanced privileges. There's no way to get one now, but if you already had one and you've been renewing it, you can still use those privileges. There was also at one point a license kind of in between technician and general, which was called Technician Plus. And that happened around the time that I got licensed when they took away the Morse code requirement for technician, and Technician Plus still had the Morse code requirement. So if you had your technician license and you passed the Morse code test, you could be a Technician Plus, and that gave you access to some other parts of the band. That's gone away now too. And they've done away with the Morse requirement for all 3 license classes now: technician, general, and amateur extra, or what we just call extra. So you don't need Morse code anymore to get a license. Thank goodness, because as I was explaining earlier, my brain is not plastic enough to learn Morse code. So I would probably not be an amateur radio operator if Morse code was still a requirement. So in 1987, the FCC gave novice class licensees access for phone on the 1.25 meter band, with the intention that that would increase the utilization of that band. And some vendors actually started selling equipment with that support, but that equipment was not widely adopted. Kenwood produced a single radio that had the 1.25 meter band on it. It was the Kenwood TH-F6A handheld radio, which was the first radio that I bought as an amateur radio operator. Great little radio, solid as a rock. Worked great on all 3 bands. It was a tri-band radio. Did 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and 1.25 meters. 5 watts on all 3 bands. A few other vendors also offered radios of various types, but it just wasn't widely adopted. There weren't enough radios out there for people to get invested in it and really use it effectively. In the late 80s, the UPS, the United Parcel Service, they lobbied the FCC to use the 1.25 meter band for land mobile radio service. They had a plan to use both voice and data services on that band for their own corporate use. And in order to do that, it couldn't be a an amateur radio band. It had to be a commercial band, right? So they were lobbying the FCC and said, "Hey, if you would give us access to this band, amateurs don't use it. Nobody's using it. We'll use it." And so um, the FCC eventually um, agreed to that. And so in 1988, they decided to take away the 220 to 222 megahertz portion of the band and allocate it to land mobile service. Now, annoyingly enough, it took so long for this to happen that UPS went and found some other way to do what they wanted to do, and they never ended up using that band anyway. So the utilization of that band is extremely low. There was some utilization of that band in the 90s and 2000s for pagers. A lot of paging companies sprung up in those times. You guys remember little pagers that you would wear on your belt? Um, a lot of paging companies sprung up during those times, and they were often using that portion of the band, that 220 to 222 portion of the band. Most of those companies were either acquired by cellular phone companies or went out of business. And that after about 2005, 2010, somewhere in that range, nobody was using that part of the band again. That is the current state of affairs for the 220 to 222 band. Hardly anybody is using that segment. It is still reserved for some federal use and commercial use, but like I say, it's not being used effectively. And it would be wonderful if the FCC would give it back to us. But their model is, why would we give it back to you guys for free when we can sell it to some other company for money, right? So it's probably never going to come back to us. Now, in 2006, they did allocate the 219 megahertz to 220 megahertz portion of the band, which remember was not part of the original 1.25 meter band. This was actually below that, 219 to 220, and they allocated that to amateurs on a secondary basis. So that band is already in use or was already assigned to a specific use. And they said, amateurs, you can use it, but you can only use it for specific purposes. I'm going to talk more about that in a minute towards the end of the presentation. We'll talk more about that little part of the 220 band. And in modern times nowadays, several manufacturers are once again starting to offer support for the 1.25 meter band. Alinco, Anytone, Baofeng, BTEC, Jetstream has had a radio that would support this band. Kenwood, TYT, Woshin, and Yaesu have all produced radios that can operate on this band. So it's starting to become a little more popular again. It's still kind of the redheaded stepchild of amateur radio, though, right? It's not heavily used. So let's talk about some radios that have 1.25 meter support. These are HTs. Remember, HTs are handheld radios. HT stands for handy talkie, and it basically means a radio that you hold in your hand and talk into, right? So these are currently available handy talkies that you can get right now. They are being manufactured now. They are being sold actively now. Baofeng produces 3 different radios that fit this category. The UV5R3, don't get the UV5R2, that doesn't have 1.25, but the UV5R3 does. The BF F8 HP Pro, I think the non-pro version does not have the 1.25 meter band, and the K63 supports it. BTEC is a company, a US company that buys Baofeng radios and puts their own firmware in them. And they have one called the UV5X3. I have one of those. It's not a bad little radio. They actually care about things like harmonics and making sure that the radio is legal and all of that stuff. Excuse me. TYT produces the TH350. That's a radio that a lot of members of the club have because the entry point for that is pretty low. You can get into that for around $70. And it is a tri-band radio. It does both all three 2 meter, 70 centimeter, and the 1.25 meter. Very solid radio, works pretty well. A little limited on number of memory channels. That's the only thing I don't like about it. But it's a decent little radio. Uh, Woshin has a few radios that they currently sell, the KGU B7D, Q10H, and 935H. I have no experience with any of those. If anybody, does anybody have a Woshin? Bob, you've got one. Do you like it?
Then what I've used until the mobile.
Yeah,
Did Dan just get the 935 and stay open?
I think he did. Yeah, I think he did.
Okay. Q10H.
The Q10H. So Woshin makes a few different radios. They are probably a little better quality than the Baofeng and a little better radio than what you're going to get for the Baofeng. But you know, I call the Baofeng the goldfish of amateur radio, right? If it breaks, you just flush it down the toilet and get a new one because they're only like $25. So it's uh it's it's a great starter radio. I wouldn't recommend it for somebody who wants to be serious about amateur radio, but it's a great starter radio if you're just getting into the hobby. Baofeng, their hardware is not as terrible as people say.
Right. Sure.
Yes.
Well, I did list it's this one.
Which one is that?
25, I think.
Is that new?
Kind of rare. There's an old version and a new version of it. But this is an excellent radio. I mean, it'll do 5 to 6 watts on the 1.25.
I might have it on the no longer being produced list.
Well, it's still active.
Are they still actively making it?
It's brand new.
Send me a link to it and I will add it to this presentation. So
Yeah, I mean, I checked on Spectrum Analyzer, it's
Pretty clean.
legal. I mean, one of them perfectly clean, I mean, it's legal, does like 8 watts on 2 meters, 7 centimeters.
that's one thing about the Baofengs. Sometimes you're going to get one that's really clean. Sometimes you're going to get one that's not really clean, and they are the same brand, the same model. Even sometimes from the same lot number, and one can be really good, and one can be really less than good. So keep that in mind. But yeah, they Woshin makes a high quality radio. I know Dan has one, Russ has one. So if you want to take a look at one, go bother Russ after the meeting. And then the
35 cent, really nice, but it's like $200.
yeah, it's not cheap, right? And I'm all about cheap because I'm pretty cheap. So, but yeah, I mean a lot of times you get what you pay for, but sometimes you get a gem, right? And then the Yaesu VX6R has some support for the 1.25 meter band. Sherwood has one right there. One of the things about the 1.25 meter band on that radio is the power level is very limited. Like on my Kenwood F6A, I can do 5 watts on any band. On my TYT, I can do 5 watts on any band. On that guy, I can do 5 watts on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, but I'm only going to get about an eighth of a watt out on the 1.25 meter band. Now, that said, an eighth of a watt on the 1.25 meter band is actually pretty darn good because of the characteristics of the band. And you'd be amazed at how good it actually is. But that is something to consider if you live in a fringe area or you're trying to use it in places where you don't have a direct line of sight or something like that. You may find that it's less effective. Mobiles, and I lumped in base radios here because really base radios are just mobiles attached to a power supply as opposed to mobiles attached to a vehicle. But Elinco makes a couple. Anytone makes a couple. I've got this AT5888 UV3. Don't get the UV2, get the UV3. The 2 is only a dual band. This is a great little radio. It'll do 25 watts on the 1.25 meter band. And I have that. Well, I used to have it in my old vehicle. I haven't put it in my new vehicle yet. It's still in my list of things to accomplish. sometime before winter. But
And you buy the separation kit with it.
buy the separation kit. So it has the ability to take the front panel off of the radio itself and run a cable between the two. And the separation kit includes I want to say 8 foot or 10 foot cable and a little plastic rig that the front panel clips onto that you can mount somewhere in your vehicle. So it makes a nice, clean installation. One thing I really like about it is the microphone plugs into the head, the detachable head, not into the body of the radio. When we get to talk about some of the Kenwood radios, the microphone has to plug into the body of the radio. So if you want to separate the head away from the body, you need a cable to go to the head and a long cable to go to the microphone. So that's something to consider. The 578 is a DMR radio. I'm not going to go into what DMR is, but it's a digital platform. It does support analog signals as well. And it's another one that doesn't give you the full power of the radio on that band. I know Dan has one of these and he says it's a great radio. You've got both. Which one do you like best?
Depending on what I do.
Yeah.
At home, the 588 is my home radio.
Yeah.
The 578 is mobile.
It's your mobile.
Break that into regional bands, hit the button instead of trying to remember, my age, I can't remember.
Right. As a DMR radio, it uses a code plug for configuration and it has room for thousands of memory channels in there. And you can break those apart by banks very easily in a code plug. And so that's one of the big advantages of that for that use. Russ.
I also have a cheap QYT radio.
Is that the 9,000?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm going to talk about it.
79.
7,900. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not familiar with that one. Is that currently being manufactured or is that?
Yes.
Oh,
About $90.
I'll have to add it to my list. I based this list off of the Wikipedia article on 1.25 meters, and that list was out of date. I added several that I knew about that were not on that list. So it sounds like there's at least a few others that I didn't know about that need to get on that list. So there's a lot of retired radios. These are radios that are not being manufactured anymore, but you can often find them for sale at swap meets or on eBay or something like that. On the HT side, there's Baofeng UV82X. The club actually owns, well, let me say, we own a bunch of those. I think 3 of them work. So one of the cool things about that is it's actually a dual band radio, but it works on the UHF 70 centimeter band and the 1.25 meter band. It does not work on 2 meters. And the way that it's designed, if you press the top of the PTT button, you're on the one band. If you press the bottom of the PTT button, you're on the other band. So you can select which band you're going to talk on while you're deciding which end of the button to push. Don't push the middle because I don't know what happens if you push the middle. But we do have a few of those. Sam is the custodian of those radios, and if you need a radio for an event or something like that, he would be happy to lend you one. Again, those radios were purchased by the fire department.
Sam,
Yes, Sam, go ahead.
the fire department requested those back, so I turned
they
all
did.
those back to their fire department. I no longer have them.
I understand. All right. So I was out of date on that information. Apparently, we don't have those radios anymore, which is sad, but oh well. The Kenwood THF-6A I already talked about. I have one of those. Great little radio, really super solid. The THD-74, there's a bit of a storied history around the D-74. It came out a few years ago, and right after it came out, there was a big fire at this particular chip manufacturing plant that made one of the chips that was integral to the radio. And so it became unavailable. They were unable to get that chip, and they just stopped making the D74. You will occasionally find a D74 on eBay for a lot more than it's really worth. If you really want one for completeness, go ahead and buy it. It's a good, solid radio. It has D-Star and APRS support built into it, as well as the all three bands, the 70 centimeter, 1, 2 meter, and the 1 1/4 meter. Good radio. I've got one. I love it. It's a beautiful radio. It does Bluetooth connectivity to my computer. You can do all kinds of cool stuff with it. They actually made a new one that they call the D75A that is basically exactly the same, except it doesn't use that chip that they can't get. It uses a different chip. So that one is actively being manufactured and sold by radio vendors. These things roll out at about $600 or $700. These are not cheap radios. They are really good radios, but in, in my utilization, if I'm being deployed to some activity, I'm probably not going to take it. I'm probably going to take my TYT radio because if I drop my TYT radio and break it, I can get another one for $70. If I drop my Kenwood and break it, I'm not going to get another one for a long time. So it's a good radio, but it's definitely on the more expensive side. Then of course there's the Woshin, then the Yaesu VX7R and 8R. You may think, wait a minute, the 6R is currently being produced. Why aren't the 7R and 8R being produced anymore? Well, you'd have to ask Yaesu that question. But they are no longer manufacturing the 7R and the 8R, but they are still manufacturing the 6R. So if you want a 7R or an 8R, the used market is your friend. As far as mobiles go, the Alinco DR235 is a very solid radio. We have one of these in the ham shack over at Fire Station 83, adjacent to the Emergency Operations Center. The one thing to know about this radio is it's a single band radio. It only does 1 1/4 meters. It doesn't do anything else. So if you're going to get something that is a single band radio, that's a good radio to get. It's a very solid radio. Unfortunately, not being manufactured anymore. The BTEC UV2501, they have a 220 version. And again, that's not being manufactured anymore, but it's a decent radio if you can find it. The Jetstream JT220 is also a single band radio. The TYT TH9000, they actually made 4 versions of this radio, and they call them all the TH9000, which is very annoying. So you have to be very careful what you're buying to make sure you're getting what you think you are getting. One of them is on 2 meters, one of them is on 70 centimeters, one of them is on 1 1/4 meters, and one of them is on 6 meters. So don't buy the wrong one, is basically what I'm saying. Make sure it's got the band that you want it to have. These are all single band radios. And then the Woshin KG, what is that? B55. Again, I have no experience with the Woshin radios, so I just know that that exists. All right.
Yeah.
Yes.
On the current radios, there's the Alinco DRC S25.
I have that right here.
Okay, that one is only 220.
Is that one only
That
220?
one's only 220.
Okay, so that's a single band radio as well.
And it's about $250 to $259. I bought my Anytone AT588 UV3 off of eBay for the same price.
Yeah. And you got a tri-bander.
A tri-band versus
Yeah.
a monoband.
Now, some people will say the monoband is the single band radio is nice because it's really solid on that single band. But I like the flexibility. I'm not going to have 12 radios in my car. So, I like the flexibility of having one radio that has all 3 bands on it. Kenwood has announced their new THD 750A, which supposedly will be available in December of 2025. I've heard conflicting statements on that. I've heard December, I've heard January, I've heard March, I've heard after March. So I don't know for sure when it's really going to come out, and Kenwood is very close-lipped on what they say is going to happen. I expect this radio to cost about $1,400. This is a mobile radio. It's a beautiful radio, and I am coveting one. But
This is a tri-band.
it's a tri-bander, and it has APRS and D-Star built in, and it's a full duplex radio. So you can do crossband repeat, you can do satellite operations with it, the whole 9 yards. It's basically like the D75 in a mobile package with 50 watts of power. So gorgeous looking radio. I have noted that several vendors are offering pre-orders of this radio where you pay $35 and get your name on the list. And then when the radio actually comes out, you've got a guaranteed slot to purchase one. So they won't sell any more pre-orders than they have radios on order for. So I do have my pre-order in place with Gigaparts, even though I don't know if I'm actually going to buy it or not. My wife says I can buy it, but we'll see. So some other radios that are out there. I actually have a couple of these TID radio TDH3 radios. These are actually GMRS radios. They're sold as a GMRS radio. But if you hold down a particular key combination when you turn the radio on, you can flip it into amateur radio mode, in which case it operates like an amateur radio on 2 meters and 70 centimeters. And somewhere buried deep within the menu system is a place where it says, turn on 220 transmit capability. And I haven't tested that to see how clean that is or how good that is, but there is theoretically the facility for that radio to operate on 1.25 meters. So we'll see how that works at some point. I've got one, yeah, but I didn't bring it with me, obviously. So maybe I'll bring it next week or the following week. So we'll see. Then other radios may also be able to be unlocked or have their transmit restrictions removed through a software configuration or sometimes a hardware configuration. Be careful when you do this because quite often these radios are not designed to operate on 1.25 meters. And remember, 1.25 is not harmonic with 2 meter and 70 centimeter. So there may be some high SWR values. SWR is standing wave ratio, and it basically measures how much power that you are sending towards the antenna comes back into the radio instead of being radiated out through the antenna. So some of these may have very high SWRs on this band. You would want to test that and validate that it actually does what you think it's going to do before you depend on that for operations. There are also transverters available. A transverter is essentially a transformer for radio frequency operations. And it sits between your HF radio and your antenna system and converts 10 meter frequencies to 1.25 meter frequencies and back again on received signals. And you have to know what you're doing to work with one of these things. So it is a passive component. Yeah. Yeah. It does work. You have to know what your conversion ratio is because of course your radio is going to show you the 10 meter frequency and you have to be able to convert that to the appropriate frequency on the band you're transverting into. There's a lot of transverters around for bumping up to like the gigahertz bands and things like that. There are transverters available to go from 10 meter to 1.25 meter. So that is an option. I don't know how great of an option it is, but it is an option. So yep, it does exist. Okay, so let's talk about the Mark repeater. Sorry, we got a fire station being called out into action. It always says it once and then it repeats it again on the local frequency. So there we go. Okay, so Murray Amateur Radio Club, we have a repeater and it's on the 1.25 meter band. And you're thinking, why are we using the 1.25 meter band if it's so unpopular among people? Well, there are some reasons for that. So Mark is sponsored and supported by the Murray Amateur, by the Murray City and Murray Fire Department. As you see, we're meeting here at the fire department. They love us to come here. One reason that we exist is to support Murray City and the fire department with emergency response in the event of a major natural or man-made disaster. And in these cases, if there was a large earthquake, for example, that affected the entire valley, every agency in the valley is going to be trying to use a very limited number of public service radio frequencies in order to do their communications. And it is extremely likely that that system will be swamped and it will not be able to give you a signal when you need it the most. So the way those public service systems work, they are they basically have, I think the system that's in use right now has about 10 frequencies that are allocated within this county. And there's one additional frequency that's like a master frequency. And so all of the radios are talking on this master frequency in a digital fashion. And when the fire department user or the police user tries to key up their radio, what it will do is it will send a message on that channel to the master system saying, hey, I need a voice channel. And that master system will pick an available radio and send them back, use this frequency. And then their radio will go blip and they can start talking. If they push the button and it doesn't go blip, they can't start talking because they don't have a frequency in use, a frequency available for them.
That's like a 10 at a time thing then?
Yeah, however many it is. I think it's like 10, it may be more than that, but yeah, so there can be 10 individual transmissions happening at a given moment. Okay. And that includes the dispatchers too, right? So when a dispatcher keys up, they get an available frequency pair to be able to send their signal out to everybody. If there is a major earthquake in the valley, chances are all of the agencies are going to be trying to use that system all at once, and it's going to be very overwhelmed. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of 2-meter and 70-centimeter repeaters all around the valley, but the amateur radio operators are going to overwhelm those frequencies as well in trying to support their local facilities, right? Their local services agencies. There aren't a lot of people with 1.25 meter repeaters. There are some, but there aren't a lot. And so the decision was made that Mark would support a 1.25 meter repeater, and that would give us a better chance of having essentially unrestricted access to the airwaves on our repeater in the event of an emergency of that nature. Okay. So I'll get to that in a sec. Okay, so more about the Mark repeater. It's a Motorola Quantar system. It was originally used in public service, but was later modified to operate on the 1.25 meter band. We've had that repeater online since April 22nd of 2021. We did have an outage of several months last year. If you want to read up on what happened and why the outage happened and all of that, it's on the club website and the URL is right here. If we get to the end and we have time, it looks like we're going to have plenty of time. I can talk about that a little bit and about what happened and what we did to fix it. That repeater is physically located at the Murray Amateur Shelter? No, the Murray Animal Shelter, which is on Cottonwood Street, about halfway between 5300 South and 5900 South. So they have a nice tower there. They have a 200-foot tower there. The power company, the Murray Power Company, has a repeater on that tower, and we have our repeater on that tower as well. Our antenna is, there's no internet service there right now. Oh, there is. They do have that they put in. Okay, so let me finish this. Our antenna is at about 180 feet above ground level. The power company actually has two antennas. They have a receive antenna and a transmit antenna. Their receive antenna is at about 160 feet and their transmit antenna is at about 190 feet on the tower. at about the 100-foot level on that tower, the Murray School District has put in 3 Wi-Fi systems, and I believe, I don't know what band they're operating on. I'm not positive, and I'm not gonna guess, but they are used by the school system. They were put in around the time COVID was happening because they were sending kids home with Chromebooks, and some of them didn't have internet access at home. And so they gave them a little wireless access point that they could use that would bridge into that system. And you'll see these antennas on all of the schools, and there's 3 of them on that tower. And so they have their own little Wi-Fi network for the students that they can use. Now, we're trying to leverage our own Wi-Fi setup with that, not using the school's equipment, but using a system called Eridan, which is out of scope for this meeting, but we'll be talking about it more next week. So if you're interested, come next week and learn more about it. I've also got this link here at the bottom of this slide that links to our club repeaters page. We currently only have 1 repeater, but you'll find more information and lots of pictures of our repeater and the area where it's installed and everything on that page. So if you're interested, check it out. Okay. So what other 1 1/4 meter repeaters are around? Now, to answer your question, Bruce. So Sammy, KA7 ECG, he's been very involved in getting 1 1/4 meter repeaters up and running across the valley. He's the guy we actually bought our repeater from. So he's got a lot of different 1 1/4 meter repeaters, and he's trying to get them online all over the place in the state and get them all linked together into a 1 1/4 meter repeater linked network. So at some point, we will probably put a link radio on our repeater. We will have the ability to turn that off in the event of an emergency situation where we want to isolate our repeater from the rest of that link. But that's something that will be happening. And there is a page on the club website that lists a bunch of 220 repeaters or 1 1/4 meter. I like to say 1 1/4 meter because we're not really on 220, right? We're on 222 through 225, but a lot of people say 220, but I like to say 1 1/4 meter. There's also a mailing list and weekly net operating on the 1 1/4 meter band. It's the Salt Lake 220 net, and they meet on the radio on Tuesday evenings at 9 p.m. And they've been meeting primarily on our club repeater because we are very centrally located in the valley. We have really good coverage throughout the Salt Lake Valley from our repeater. They do send an email to the list prior to each net. Yes, Stan.
Are we using our own repeater or broken?
It's fixed.
It's fixed.
It's been fixed as of January. Well, end of December. Yeah, when it fell out. Yeah, yeah.
You're the one who broke it.
Yeah, he's the one that broke it. Yeah. So,
Sure.
yeah. So yeah, that was an unfortunate event. I can talk about it in a minute here, but I did want to. I have one more slide, and that's that 219 network. Remember, we talked about the FCC gave us access to 219 through 220, and this band, or this part of the band, is known as the haunted band. Now, I'll let you wonder why. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but that's what they call it, the haunted band. And amateur radio use is a secondary user of the band. It's only usable for fixed digital message forwarding systems. Now, I have a little blurb I'm going to read to you. The first thing to remember is amateur radio service is a secondary user of this portion of the band. The primary user is the AMTS, the Automated Maritime Telecommunications System. Okay. In support of that, it's in the rules that no amateur station may transmit from a location within 640 kilometers of an AMTS coast station. That's about 398 miles, unless the amateur station licensee has given written notification of the station's specific geographic location for such transmissions to the AMTS licensee at least 30 days prior to making such transmissions. And no amateur station may transmit from a location that is within 80 kilometers or 50 miles of an AMTS coast station unless that amateur station licensee holds written approval from the AMTS licensee. What's that?
That's on.
I don't know if it's on the test or not, but it's in the rules. So it may be on the test now. Remember, I took the test 25 years ago, so it very well may be, right? So, but the key factor is there's supposed to be some list of AMTS stations. I searched everywhere and could not find that list. Now, what I understand is the ARRL was supposed to maintain that list. They do not and have not. And figuring out where an AMTS coast station is kind of important because you can't operate on it unless you're more than 400 miles away, unless you tell them you're going to. And if you're within 50 miles, you not only have to tell them you're going to, but they have to say it's okay and give you written proof that it, written documentation that they said it was okay. That's hard to do when you don't know where any of these things are, right? This is a problem, okay? The other problem is, what the heck is a fixed digital message service, right? Fixed digital message forwarding system. What is that? So I looked that up too. And what that is it's a digipeater for packet radio, okay? In the same section, it says, use is restricted to amateur stations participating as forwarding stations in fixed point-to-point digital message forwarding systems, including intercity packet backbone networks. It is not available for other purposes. Only between digipeaters, right? Going into packet radio is way out of scope for this meeting tonight, so I'm not going to even start on that. But it says before you operate, you have to send the location to the ARRL at least 30 days before transmitting, so the station's location can be incorporated into a database of such stations. Again, no such database appears to exist anywhere that I've been able to find. Nobody at the ARRL acknowledges any such list or database. And yeah, you can take that as it is. There's also a power limitation of 50 watts and 100 kilohertz of bandwidth for those transmissions. So I checked with what other people said. I was not able to find anything useful about that. Now, there is a great presentation about this band from Rat Pack. If you guys aren't familiar with Rat Pack, that is a group of radio amateurs who produce 2 sessions a week where they talk about various topics. Lots of great information on there. Sometimes really bad information on there. Sometimes really bad talks that you can barely stand to listen to. So keep that in mind. It's not always the greatest. You probably don't want to tune in every week, but they do have some interesting stuff sometimes. They have a presentation on the Haunted Band, and the link to the recording is right here. So when I publish this, you'll be able to access these links. So if you're interested in that, finding out about that, I'd play it now, but it's 50 minutes long, and I don't want to get into that. So, but it's actually a really good presentation. Quite enjoyed it when I watched it. But that's the it. That's the end. So let me go back to the Mark repeater outage. So what happened when we first put the repeater up? One of the club members, Gordon, he had some Heliax cable. Now, when you put in a radio or repeater system or something like that, you've got the repeater itself, which is basically 2 radios and some control circuitry. And then you've got an antenna, and then you've got what they call the feed line, which goes between the repeater and the antenna, or between your radio and an antenna, right? When you're with a handheld, you don't have that. The antenna is directly attached to the radio. But if you're in like a mobile You might have an antenna on the outside of your vehicle. You don't want to put the radio on the outside of the vehicle. You put the radio inside and you run some feed line between the radio and the antenna. So because we had to go up 180 feet to where we were going to put our antenna, well, we wanted the best cable that we could get for cheap because we didn't have any money, because we don't charge dues. And Gordon had a big spool of Heliax cable that he was willing to donate to the club. Now, unfortunately, it wasn't quite 180 feet worth. It was about 150 feet worth. And so what we did was we ran the Heliax from the antenna at the top of the tower down the tower to about 50 feet from the bottom of the tower. And then we bridged in some LMR 400 cable to go from there into the building and into the repeater itself. And this worked fine for 4 years until one day it suddenly burned something out in the repeater finals. So the final is part of the amplifier for the outgoing signal, and something burned out and it stopped transmitting. And we went and we looked at the repeater, and there was a red light on the repeater saying that there was a failure in the power final. And so we pulled the repeater out of the rack and we took it out to some guy who knew how to repair these Quantar repeaters. And he dug into it and looked at it and figured out, yep, you've got a burned out transistor in there. And he replaced it and everybody was happy. And then he said, now, why did that burn out? And so then we started looking at our setup and our installation, and we discovered that our SWR, remember standing wave ratio on our antenna system, was extremely high, like really, really high, much higher than it was when we first installed it. And so we started trying to figure out what could have possibly happened to cause this. And this is when we realized that the Heliax cable that we had was what they call air core. So it was like a hard armored shell around a center conductor, and there was air in between the center conductor and the outer shell, right? So there were little spacers every once in a while down this cable to keep them separated, but it was mostly full of air. Or as we discovered when we started figuring out what was going on, it was mostly full of water. This was not good, right? This is what was causing all of our problems. So we said to Murray City, look, we need to take this cable down, get some foam core Heliac cable that won't suffer from this problem, and rerun it with this new cable. And Sammy said, look, I have a spool of cable. I will sell you for $3,000, which actually wasn't a bad deal for the cable that we got. However, it took a while to get Murray City to cough up $3,000 to buy the cable. And then it took a while longer for Murray City to cough up enough money to pay for some guy to climb the tower and put the new cable in place. And that didn't end up happening until December. So we were down for what, 5 months total, I think.
Oh, wow.
It was a while. And so we were very unhappy with that. But we got that new Heliax cable installed, and it's been working fabulous ever since. And we are having no trouble with it at all. And the cable that we got is actually even better than the cable that we had before. It's a bigger grade cable that has less loss per foot. And so it gives us an even better signal coming out of that repeater. So
And it's long enough.
and it's long enough to go all the way into the building, so we don't have to mask off and switch to LMR 400 or anything like that. So, yeah, so it was a learning experience for all of us, and it was somewhat disheartening to not have our repeater for several months, but we got really good at using simplex for those months, and we discovered that with 1.25 meter simplex, we could actually do pretty well within Murray, at least. The outlying stations in other cities didn't have much luck getting in touch with us, but the ones that were in Murray could actually reach us pretty well on simplex, which gave us a little faith.
Which antenna worked best for simplex
Um,
and is
I don't know. Different people have different antennas, right? So one of the things that you'll notice is some of the radios, like the Baofangs, they use a female SMA connector on the radio, and need a male connector on the antenna, and other ones like the Kenwoods and Yaesus and stuff like that are the other way around. The TYTs are like the Kenwoods. They need the antenna that has the male end. It's the other way around, the male end on the antenna for the TYTs and the Kenwoods. The Baofangs and associated radios have the male end on the radio and the female end on the antenna. So, yeah, it's actually been working pretty well doing the simplex. So, but now we have our repeater back in operation. We use it every week for our Sunday net. And the 220 Club is using it for their Tuesday night net. And, you know, there's much rejoicing in 1.25 meter land here. Yes, Bob.
Whatever happened to the club's 2 meter?
So we never had a 2 meter. We have a 440, 70 centimeter repeater. As far as I know, it is still sitting in Dan's basement. We don't have a frequency pair allocated for it, and we don't have anywhere to put it. So we've talked about putting it at Station 83. We've talked about putting it on the trailer, but we haven't made any decisions about that repeater. So, yes, Dan.
Yes, Dan's not here.
Dan is not here. He's in Springville at a safety fair with the trailer.
I had talked to him. He wanted solar panel.
Yeah.
For the trailer?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I had,
Okay.
so I'm going to well,
Awesome.
it's about 389.
Okay. Cool. That'll be great. Yeah, we've got one. Yep. We've got a regulator, charge controller stuff already on board on the trailer. So, yeah. All right, that's all I've got. Does anybody have any questions or comments to throw out at the end? If not, I'm going to stop the recording.